Advocacy Day for Access and Independence will be South Carolina's first civil rights rally for people with disabilities. There have been advocacy days in the past, but this is the first one that's really focused on independence, freedom, um, inclusion, and all of those things that we're fighting for. It's going to be the first real day for that in our state. And it's going to tie South Carolina into the disability rights movement that's been going on nationwide for some time now. We're a little behind, but this will be the stepping off point for all of us to be part of that movement. Advocacy Day for Access and Independence is supported by 21 organizations who want greater independence for people with disabilities. Some of y'all work with some of those organizations, some of you don't, but you'll see all of us represented the day of the event, and and lots of other people that aren't associated with an organization. Advocacy Day is funded by the State Plan for Independent Living. This is a plan that's developed every year by the SILC, which is an organization that is set up through the Rehabilitative Services Act. It includes centers for independent living in our state, like Able, South Carolina, Disability Resource Center, and Walton Options. It also includes vocational rehabilitation, Commission for the Blind, and a couple others. And with that plan, the funding is for 3 years. So this is our first year. We'll have 2 more years that are already funded, and following that, there's going to be options for us to continue that as long as we're really working to make change. With that, the bills are paid, so we're not trying to get any funding from anywhere. The goal of the day is it's all about equality and access for people with disabilities. So we're not looking for money, we're not looking for funding. We're just trying to further the civil rights of people with disabilities. So first of all, what is advocacy? How would y'all define advocacy in general? I'm going to get some audience participation, some feedback.
Important to ourselves and helping the community understand what we need to live independently.
Yeah, I agree with that definition. Good. How else would y'all define that? Advocacy. I agree with that one too, Ted. Really down at its essence, advocacy is an effort to change something. So in its simplest form, our goal is change. With that, there are 3 different types of advocacy that people talk about a lot. There is self-advocacy, which is a person standing up for their own rights to make sure that they get access to what they want. There's individual advocacy, which is when a person stands up for another person or another couple people. And then there's systemic advocacy, and that's when we stand to change policy, we stand to change systems, to improve systems for everyone involved, from the people who need the service to the people who deliver the service. We want change, and we want it to be best for everyone. And at the middle, where all of these intersect, self-advocacy, individual advocacy, and systemic advocacy is really where we hope Advocacy Day for Access and Independence will be. It'll be for people with disability, people without disability, all on the same page, working for the same goal of inclusion, access, and independence. That's our unlocking symbol, because we hope to unlock the barriers that prevent that access and independence. So why systems advocacy? We have these other 2 options for advocacy. Why would we do this systems thing? And really the goal is to reach lots of people. We don't want to just help one person navigate a complicated system. We want to make the system simpler to open the floodgates to everyone. So that's one of the reasons why. Systemic advocacy is also necessary to ensure inclusion for everyone. With individual advocacy or with self-advocacy, we're getting 1 or 2 through, and maybe after a long time we'll be able to get 80% of people through. Or we can change the system and make sure that no one is left behind and that everyone can be included. And that's our goal. And the last real reason for systems advocacy is that we can change everything. We can change the world. We can change our state. And I can guarantee we're going to have fun doing it. The fun starts now, and it's going to continue through the 8th and beyond. But this work, and it is work, this work can be fun and will be fun as we work it out together. So we have the why, but why us? And that's a really important question to think about, is that a lot of times decisions are going to be made. So why us? We can answer that a lot of ways. It's because a lot of us have personal experience with barriers to independence and equality. Maybe some of us have disabilities. Maybe some of us have family members with a disability. But we have real life experience, and we know the problems better than most because we've come against those. One of the things, and this is the one that really stands out to me, is that if we don't speak up for ourselves, someone will speak for us. If we're not doing the talking, we can't control the conversation. So someone, a self-proclaimed expert, might step up and say, what might a self-proclaimed disability expert say about people with disabilities? Let me get a little more specific. What might a self-proclaimed transportation expert say about people with disabilities and about their ability to access services? Okay. Well, I think that silence might kind of wrap it up, is that we don't know what someone else is going to say about the abilities of someone with a disability, or about barriers, or about access. A lot of times, people who don't have that firsthand experience, they make decisions that aren't very inclusive. So we want to make sure that people with disabilities have their own voice and can speak for themselves, because they are the experts on disability issues within all the systems, from transportation, education, employment, all of those things. People with disabilities are the experts on disability related to those issues. And we want to empower individuals who don't feel comfortable sharing their message yet on how to do that. And as we have kind of a soapbox, an opportunity for us to all stand and speak, we're going to empower individuals who don't feel comfortable yet, and be able to cultivate those new voices, be able to nurture those young voices so that they too can stand for their rights. All people have a voice in independence and civil rights. Now we're going to talk a little bit about strategy. In order to advocate, there's a lot of different strategies out there. The one that I want to share with y'all is the pitchfork. Okay, the pitchfork, kind of visualize it a little bit. It's that big old fork that we use to pick up and move hay. So in this pitchfork, we have 5 different tongs, and each of these tongs brings some friction, it brings some traction, and the more tongs, the more effective our approach. Okay, so this pitchfork, it has 5 approaches. The first one is the judicial process. Judicial is about the courts. So using the courts through litigation, through lawsuits, either civil or criminal, or complaints, through judicial organizations, we can make an impact that way. Legislative advocacy is when we affect laws and lawmakers, and we influence those things to get the laws that we want, to get the laws that are the most inclusive and the best for everyone. Legislative for this one is highlighted because legislative advocacy is really at the heart of Advocacy Day. Our goal is to influence lawmakers. Our goal is to get to know our reps and our senators so that we have a voice through our representation. Next is public education and media. There's going to be some public education going on at Advocacy Day. As people speak and share their experience, there's going to be people who weren't familiar with some of the issues. Some of them may be lawmakers, some of them may be media. But as we increase awareness of the issues, it's a whole lot easier to address them when people know about them. Another kind of tong of the pitchfork is executive administrative. And that's when organizations that carry out policies and requirements, that they stick to them. So making sure that they're following through on what's written in the right way. And the last one is direct action, and that's when general members of the public, that's when people like you and me, we get together and we have a rally, we have a protest, we have a march, we have maybe some civil disobedience. Um, Everything that we do is really going to be direct action as we work on judicial, legislative, public, and executive processes. So all of these are represented a little bit in Advocacy Day, but like I said, legislative advocacy is the biggest one, probably closely followed by public education. Well, the pitchfork is a tool. It's a tool for us to advocate for things that we want to see change. Like any tool, we have to know how to use it well. So using the pitchfork, we're going to go through these 5 points. Some of them will take a little longer than others, but we're going to start with identifying the issues. So based on y'all's experience, what do you think some of the issues are? What are some of the barriers to people with disabilities in South Carolina? I didn't quite hear that.
Transportation.
Yeah, transportation as a barrier. Absolutely. What are some other barriers y'all can think of?
The lack of funding for the resources and knowing where to look for the resources.
Okay, so lack of resources and funding for those resources. And when we do have resources, sometimes we don't know where they are. Well, I agree with both of those, and we're actually going to talk about both of those. Over the past few months, we've been working together with ABLE as just one of 21 organizations. All 21 have been at the table talking about what these issues are and trying to put them together in a way where we can make change and we can explain what the problem is. And those are two things that we've talked about on a regular basis. So we're going to see those. And really, I would say that the first one, issue 1, has to do with those services. Issue 1, as we've defined it, focuses on ADA coordinators. So in the picture that you should see on this slide, we have someone who's accessing services through the use of a sign language interpreter. Okay, so this person is communicating with someone in local or state government and communicating through an interpreter so that they can access the services they need. So first, in order to understand this issue, we're going to talk about what an ADA coordinator is. An ADA coordinator is an employee of a state or local government agency that helps facilitate an organization's ability to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, making sure that they're complying with those requirements with the ADA. They also ensure people with disabilities have equal access to all government services. So if you think about our government, there's a lot of different departments and pieces of the government that should have ADA coordinators that will help us access those services, like the Department of Social Services, DSS. Sometimes we don't want to have to deal with their services, but we should be able to access them under the Americans with Disabilities Act. People with disabilities have an equal right to those services. Services like emergency preparedness training, fire and rescue, any service that you can think of, an ADA coordinator would exist to facilitate that service. So the law, the ADA says that any state or local government agency that has 50 or more employees, that they have to have an ADA coordinator. So every state or local agency that's of fair size should have someone to help facilitate people with disabilities of accessing those services. That kind of begs the question, well, what's the barrier? Some of y'all may know that many state agencies, they don't have ADA coordinators, or when they do, the ADA coordinators don't have all the tools that they need to really do their job well. Maybe they don't have the training they need. They don't have an understanding of the ADA. So some of the barriers to those government services, to those resources, may be that materials aren't available in Braille for people who are blind. Maybe meetings are held upstairs where there's no elevator. Ted, yes, ADA coordinators are required by federal law. The problem there is that there are not always ADA coordinators anyways. So that's the barrier. Oftentimes interpreters are not provided, or individuals are not allowed to bring personal care aids to different programs. Suing is one option. That would be a possible thing, but a lot of times with an advocacy approach, we can jump towards lawsuits, or we can kind of guide the policy when we have an open ear. And we're hoping that this will open the ear so that we can start talking and we can start communicating. When people do things willingly, they do them so much faster than drawn out through litigation. So this is why we advocate. After we go through all of these issues and we do it for a while, and we know that they know and things still aren't happening, that might be an option. And I say might, but you know what I mean. That would be an option when we know that they know because we've taught them over and over. So without an ADA coordinator, there's no clear path to request accommodations for people who need accommodations to access a service. And there's no real way to address complaints. If they don't know who the ADA coordinator is or how to get access to the ADA coordinator, then these issues, these violations of the ADA aren't getting remedied. One of the benefits and really the goal of this is we would rather the state have ADA coordinators who know what they're doing so that we can prevent those lawsuits. We want to get things done quicker than that. I love that question, though. Absolutely. So, unlocking the barrier. This is some of the suggestions that the supporters have come up with, and that we want to see the South Carolina General Assembly create accountability standards for state agencies in designating, that means giving someone the job of ADA coordinator and training those coordinators. Okay, so one form of accountability is a lawsuit, but we want one that's kind of self-imposed. We want the General Assembly to say, hey, if this department head does not have an ADA coordinator, then they're going to be in trouble. We also want quality assurance measures to ensure periodic checks for compliance, that people are following what they're supposed to be doing, that ADA coordinators are resolving ADA complaints. So what we would suggest and what the solution would look like is procedures to make sure state agencies first have an ADA coordinator. Next is requiring participation in training about the ADA requirements, so making sure the ADA coordinators know what their job is and how to do it. Penalties for agencies that do not comply, and like I said, self-imposed. If the General Assembly says this will be the penalty, then we don't have to wait for a lawsuit. The state can just do it itself. And a complaint line. That's a recommendation we have for the state. We want to see a phone number that people can call with complaints for non-compliance with the ADA. So being able to report those issues quickly, and then those issues would be sent to the ADA coordinators at each place and rectified from there. We think that this would really help and hopefully prevent the need for a long drawn out federal lawsuit. Issue 2 that we've come up with and we've been talking about extensively has to do with community living. So the picture that you see on this slide, this is a couple, and both of them have intellectual disabilities, but they live independently in the community. And since they're able to do that, they have jobs and kids, and life is kind of on their terms. That's our goal for South Carolina. So as we look at this issue, I'm going to give you all some background information. Historically, and this is a part of history that oftentimes people don't like talking about, but historically people with disabilities were segregated from society and placed in nursing homes or other types of institutions. It's less common than it used to be, but it still happens more often than it should because medical providers aren't aware of resources. Medical providers don't know what's available out there for people to live independently. And there's also low expectations for individuals with disabilities. Um, and a lot of times that's medical too, is that these medical professionals think that individuals with disabilities won't be able to do it. They're just not capable. Um, and that's a barrier. And we'll talk about that barrier. And the last one is that every person, every human being has a right to live in communities. And they have the right to enjoy the same freedom and activity as everyone else. That's already afforded to us. But the barrier is that instead, people are being placed into controlled settings that maybe aren't the most appropriate, and they're expensive. Things like nursing homes, psychiatric facilities, institutions for individuals with intellectual disabilities, emergency rooms. So all of these things are people are getting placed when they may not need that service, and it costs a lot for us as taxpayers because the state itself could save more money and serve more people if it shifted funding to community services. Community services are much more financially viable, and they also result in people being able to live at home and make their own decisions. South Carolina's Home Again program, this is our version of something that was passed down federally, is supposed to help individuals transition from institutions, things like nursing homes and psychiatric facilities, into stable community placement. The problem with this program is that it's lagging behind states that are pretty similar to us, like Georgia and North Carolina. And another part of that problem is that there's not a whole lot of reporting, so it's hard for us to get real hard numbers about what the program is doing. Nancy, I see you have a question, so I'm going to let you jump in.
Yes, I was just going to add, I have been told that Georgia and North Carolina would have much more resource for that. I have a multiply diagnosed 19-year-old who's transitioning out of services as a youth, and we're really lacking on the adult side as far as resources. And unfortunately, he probably will need to, he will need supervised living, at least monitored somewhat. And if we put these kids out in the community with no services, they are certainly at risk because my child specifically is highly vulnerable. He's transitioning out of continuum of care services. They've told me as of June 30th, there will be no more wraparound services available for Hammond and no placement. His placement ends. And we're just terrified. I love the idea of him being able to live in the community and live somewhat independently, but I'm certainly needing to know what the resources are and how to go about getting the resources to support his somewhat independent living and keep him monitored appropriately.
Sure, and Alex can speak to this too. I work for Able, South Carolina. We're a center for independent living, so it's our goal to support and to teach skills that are necessary to live independently. And our goal is for people to live as independently as they can. So what happens a lot of times is that maybe people who don't need such a high level of services end up getting placed there anyways. And it costs a whole lot and it reduces capacity for everyone. So it's an issue and it's an issue across the spectrum that some people who can live independently aren't being allowed to, and some people who need the service can't get it because capacity is filled up. So that's a good point, and thank you for making that. So the next thing, and we'll talk about transition services as well. So sounds like you have a lot of personal, a lot of family experience with some of these things. The unlocking the barrier. If we're going to make an impact and improve this community living situation in our state, we're asking that the General Assembly focus on the Home Again program to ensure money is being used in the most effective way. We want to make sure that the General Assembly keeps its eyes on this program, both to direct funds to it if that's something that's possible, and to make sure that it's getting people out of residential placement and into community living when they're capable of that. The savings that that have been studied, found through a lot of different research avenues, is that for each person who leaves a controlled environment like a psychiatric institution or a nursing home, it actually saves the state $80,000 a year. So with that $80,000 in savings, we can use those services to increase community supports. Uh, but we want to make sure that the Home Again program is working. And another way to do that is to really open it up to review to the public. We want people from the disability community and other people to be included in this review. Uh, all of us that are here, we should all have a say in how this program is working, because it's not right now. So we can help pick it up. Some suggestions to improve the program. We want to include individuals that want to leave more types of institutional settings. Right now, the types of institutions that are available to this program are rather limited. We want to increase outreach about the Home Again program. When people are familiar with it and know that it's out there, they're more likely to take advantage of the program. And we want to collaborate with more housing entities. We want to make sure that there is housing, there's room for people to go as they leave these institutional settings to take care of themselves. An interesting fact, this is a little bit shocking because it's a short amount of time, but the number of individuals under age 65 in nursing homes increased by more than 23% in South Carolina from 2008 to 2012. So what we're seeing is that young people are being placed in nursing homes more and more often when there's no evidence that there's greater need. It's just greater placement. So we think there's definitely more opportunity for community placements for a lot of people who maybe don't have the skills or the resources they need to make independent living work. The next issue is education. And this picture is of a student who's blind using technology to keep his educational process moving. I don't want to flip through the slides too fast because I'm afraid that they won't load fast enough for y'all. But the background information on education is really focused on transition services, like ANSI mentioned. I'm only referring to you as ANSI because that's what's listed there. So I'm sorry if that's not what you normally go by. With transition services, they're supposed to be individualized services provided to students with disabilities in schools to help them get ready for everything that could take place in life after high school, whether that be college, employment, housing, self-care, community participation. That's what transition services are about. When do transition services begin? In South Carolina, transition services must begin before a child's 13th birthday. This is something that South Carolina is currently supposed to be following. Transition planning is supposed to start before a child turns 13, so there's plenty of time to make sure that everything can be addressed, all the community supports, the skills that are needed, the skills for employment and independent living, that people have what they need. Some of these things they feed right into their barrier. The barrier is that quality transition services are not being provided to middle and high school students. So even though this must is a strong word, transition services must begin before a student turns 13, it's still not happening. And that's happening for a few different reasons. One is that a lot of times teachers have low expectations for students with disabilities. I wish that weren't the case. That might be some discrimination or some bias, but it's happening. And teachers have a lot of say with the IEP process. The certificate track, the certificate of participation that's awarded to many students after they've gone through high school, it doesn't afford many employment options. There are some districts across the state that are looking at other certificate tracks just for their districts, professional tracks, skills tracks. But overall, the state of South Carolina, the certificate track, when employers see it, it doesn't mean anything to them. It just means that someone participated, which leaves employment options low. And oftentimes students are not involved VR is also pulling out of schools, right? VR is one of the major providers of transition services in South Carolina. And that might be a funding issue there too. Students are also not being involved in the IEP process. A lot of times IEP meetings are taking place without students, without a recommendation that a student is even present. In order for students to really take hold of their education and to have some ownership, they have to have ownership in the IEP meetings. And it's just not happening right now. So unlocking that barrier, some things that the supporters have come up with to make a change is that we want to require more training for transition specialists. Trainings need to be able to empower students with disabilities to reach their potential. If they don't have that skill of empowerment, it's easy for students to settle or to become complacent. We want to train parents and teachers how to encourage the students' involvement with their own planning. And we want transition specialists to know how to use assistive technology and what assistive technology will help students in the best and most effective way. Also, transition specialists need to discuss with parents and students the future impact of choosing their certificate track or their diploma track. Sometimes students are just kind of scuttled along and pushed towards the certificate track without anyone talking to them about it or without knowing what it means. So we want to make sure that transition specialists can tell a student what the certificate track means, both before and after, during and after high school, and also the benefits of the diploma track. One of the speakers that will be speaking is going to talk about how he was given this choice and how it completely changed the way that he saw himself and the way that he performed in school. So y'all listen out for that speaker next week. But it's an important thing. We want students to have that power and to have that decision to do what's best for them. Issue 4 is emergency preparedness, and the picture that you'll see as soon as it loads is a picture of an evacuation site, from outside where people can load and unload to the inside where people will be temporarily housed during an emergency situation. So in order to really talk about this emergency preparedness issue, there's some things that we need to know. Let me make sure I'm moving this along. It's important for emergency planners, in order to plan for everyone, they need to consider the unique needs of all residents. For preparing for all types of emergency situations like hurricanes, ice storms, flooding, etc. And that's what the goal of emergency planners is. They want to be able to plan for the unique needs of their residents. People with disabilities sometimes have unique needs during emergencies. Sometimes that's related to assistive technology. Maybe a person with a disability has an extra power supply or has some medical equipment that they need. Sometimes people with disabilities have an attendant that assists them with daily living activities. Sometimes people with disabilities need alternative formats in order to make sure that they're getting their emergency messages. Transportation is different for different people, so we want to make sure that people with disabilities have their transportation needs met, and that people with disabilities have the ability to communicate the way that they need to through an interpreter. So with that, the barrier is that local communities do not always consider the needs of individuals with disabilities when planning for disasters. With communities and with emergency planning, it's really a community effort. There's planners that kind of do it professionally, then they get community input. And what we're finding is that they're not seeking out community input from people with disabilities who would be the experts on what they would need in order to survive an emergency situation. And as a result, emergency communication is not in formats that are accessible to everyone. The procedures do not account for transportation needs that may be a little bit different for people with disabilities. And shelters oftentimes do not have their personnel trained. So emergency personnel, a lot of times they don't know about unique needs for people with disabilities. They don't have the assistive technology they need, or sometimes the evacuation site actually has a physical setup that does not allow people with disabilities to get in or out or to get to places where they would need to go, like restrooms and cafeterias and all of those things. So these are the barriers. These barriers are really important because they're things that oftentimes we don't see until it's way too late. There have been some very serious natural disasters, and there have been some cases where preparation has just gone terribly wrong, and we want to make sure that people with disabilities aren't carrying the load of poor planning. So to unlock that barrier, some of the suggestions the partners have come up with are specific regulations about accessibility standards. We want to make sure that shelters are accessible. We want to make sure that shelter staff know appropriate disability etiquette and how to work with people with disabilities and how to meet their needs. We also believe that guidelines should be developed to help community planners utilize best practices in creating a plan. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. We want to make sure that they're doing what's best for people with disabilities. There's a lot of resources out there from FEMA. They're working on a lot of things with accessibility. We want to make sure formats for evacuation instructions are accessible. We want to make sure that evacuation routes from roads, sidewalks, all of those things, that they're free of barriers that discriminate against people with disabilities. We want to make sure that there's logistics for those who require home-delivered meals in emergency situations, and electricity needs. A lot of people, some people with disabilities use electric wheelchairs and other electronic devices. We want to make sure that these planners know to have some extra batteries or to have generators, to have things ready for people who really need access to a power source. So we think that really the culmination of all of these things and planning for these things can help us avoid a very bad situation in the future. And we really don't want to wait for that to happen. At this point, we're 4 issues in. There are 5 more. I appreciate y'all for sticking in there with me. These things are really important. And as we go through them, you may find that you have some experience with some and not others. Hopefully this is a good use of your time to gain some awareness about some other issues. Throughout Advocacy Day, and I'm going to say this again a little bit later in the presentation, if there's anything that you don't feel comfortable talking about with a lawmaker or with a decision maker or with peers or family or friends, then you don't have to talk about those things. Just stick to what you know, and hopefully this will supplement that a little bit. The next thing that we're going to talk about is employment. And this is a picture of Tim Scott, and he is at a Walgreens, I believe it's a distribution center. So Walgreens is actually a model employer. They're doing a lot to make sure that people with disabilities have accommodations. They hire in a non-discriminatory way, and Tim Scott was kind of checking it out. And y'all correct me if I'm wrong. The photo credit that I have says that he's a rep, but I'm pretty sure that he's a senator in the U.S. Senate from South Carolina. He replaced Amin, did he not? He was then. Okay, so yeah, we're still. Yeah, cool. All right, look at y'all and your input. I love it. We're gonna work well together from now through as long as it takes to get what we need. So with employment, just a little bit of background information. This one makes me cringe more than the others for some reason. That's probably personal, a personal bias. But the Fair Labor Standards Act allows employers to obtain a specific certificate to pay individuals with disabilities less than minimum wage for the work that they perform. That's background information. It's also the barrier, because what that background allows is that individuals, we call them sub-minimum wage settings, and these include employers like Goodwill. Goodwill has gotten those certificates before. Sheltered workshops through different state organizations. They may pay as little as 22 cents per hour to the people who are working. 22 cents per hour, we don't need to run through the math, but if someone's working an 8-hour day, that's going to be less than $2 a day if they were making 22 cents for all those hours they worked. It's not an ideal situation for a lot of reasons. This subminimum wage reinforces the idea that that people with disabilities are not valuable employees, and that's just not the case. It reinforces that to the people that make those hiring decisions, to those employers, and it makes it harder for individuals with disabilities to find real jobs for real pay, and that's what our goal is. As people with disabilities can't find real jobs for real pay, they're more likely to remain on Social Security benefits, remain on government health care, and never become self-sustaining. So this is a cost that all of us bear while these employers are getting away with paying almost nothing to their employees. This way to address the issue is probably the most simple, and several states have actually done this, but we want South Carolina to enact legislation that will end subminimum wage for individuals with disabilities. We feel like this is legalized discrimination, and it just gives the wrong message to people with disabilities, to employers, to the community, and it needs to stop. Issue number 6 is healthcare. And this is one that is also really important. The picture on this slide is a person who uses a wheelchair on an accessible scale. So being able to be weighed and measured in a way that maintains their dignity. So some background on healthcare and disability. Looks like this slide didn't load too well. There's a little bit of overlap in the words, but I'll make sure we get through it. Uninsured individuals oftentimes use costly emergency rooms for care because they can't afford those primary care doctors and they can't afford the preventative care. A lot of times, just think logically, any person who maybe does not have insurance and can't afford health care, if they have a small cough, then they're probably not likely to see the doctor and pay $100 to get it checked out. Maybe the cough persists and it gets a little bit worse, and 3 months later they're still coughing. Maybe another 3 months go by and they find that their coughing is really out of control and it hurts and their whole body is racked with pain and soreness and coughing up blood and things are really getting out of hand. At that point, when that person starts to really fear for their life, the cost is justified by needing to survive. So finally, they go to the hospital or they go to the emergency room, and their bill instead is $20,000 or $30,000 for 2 weeks in the hospital. So a little bit of background information. Uninsured individuals, they tend to gravitate more towards that emergency care for fear of the cost. Many individuals with disabilities are still uninsured. They don't qualify for Medicaid because they don't meet all of the eligibility requirements. And this issue is important. We know that it ties directly into a hot button issue that's been debated in our state for a long time of Medicaid expansion. If the state's not going to pass Medicaid expansion, we need something to bridge. Okay. Oftentimes, individuals with disabilities don't make enough to afford private insurance, and they also don't make enough, or they make too much to qualify for a tax credit under the Affordable Care Act. So there's this making too much for one thing and too little for another, and people are falling through those cracks and not getting coverage that they need. Another kind of piece of background information is that medical exams for all people should be done in a private and accommodating manner that maintains the individual's dignity. So the barriers. Healthcare facilities oftentimes don't have accessible exam tables or scales or other equipment. And what that results in sometimes is people with disabilities, they don't receive those tests or receive that service when they may need it. Or medical medical professionals are trying to use that medical equipment for people on people with disabilities that it's not appropriate for. An example, I know someone with a physical disability that went to the doctor and they didn't have an accessible medical table, and the nurse came in, and this was an adult, a professional. Um, the nurse came in and tried to literally pick that person up and set them on the non-accessible hospital table without saying a word to them. So it didn't say, hey, can I help you? They just came in and tried to pick the person up and set them down. That's not medical care with dignity. ADA standards for accessibility to facilities and services are also not being followed. We have these standards for a reason, but they're not being followed, so we want to make sure that the state can turn up that pressure a little bit. So individuals that, isn't there a problem with saving people over $2,000? I'm not sure what the context of that is, Ted. Yeah, I'll let you.
My understanding is that if somebody saves over $2,000, then that threatens their ability to collect Medicaid services. Is that correct? And my understanding is that's a real problem because that won't allow them to put money into the health savings accounts that the federal government allows, tax-free accounts.
I've heard that as well. I can't directly verify if that's true, but I can get someone to get with you on that issue because it is something that I have heard. And you're right. That causes more barriers. $2,000 is not an adequate safety net for most people, but it's enough. Theoretically, people are assuming that's enough to not offer health care, and that's really not a good situation. Right. Okay. So unlocking that barrier, we need a bridge for people who cannot afford to buy insurance in the Affordable Care Act exchanges. Um, we're not saying Medicaid expansion, that's been a hot button issue. We need something in order to bridge that gap. We also think that access to preventative care is going to be really a cornerstone of reducing healthcare costs for all the taxpayers. And if preventative care is cheap and accessible and easy to use, then okay, an extra resource. Thank you, Ted. Um, as we bring in more preventative care, it prevents those really expensive medical procedures down the road. We want the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to promote awareness of effective, inclusive healthcare practices. We want to make sure that there's a state organization that can really push inclusive healthcare statewide. We want to make sure that facilities are accessible and that policies are accessible as well. Issue 7 is parenting. This photo is a mom with her child. So let's talk about some background. Adaptive equipment and techniques are out there that can make certain parenting duties and tasks easier for parents with disabilities. I'm going to read this one word for word. A disability does not prevent an individual from being able to parent effectively. Okay? Just the fact that someone has a disability does not mean they're automatically excluded from being able to be a parent. And there's a lot of tools and resources out there that make things even easier, like cribs that swing open so that parents in wheelchairs can access their children easily. Baby carriers for individuals with no arms or who use crutches or wheelchairs, people who need either don't have use of their arms or their disability makes it necessary that their arms are doing something else. And then squeaking shoes, I'm going to clarify this one a little bit. It says squeaking shoes for parents who are blind. The squeaking shoes are not for the parent, they're for the children. So a child with squeaky shoes on, the parent is always going to know what they are, where they are, and if they're getting into something. So something just to aid them in keeping close watch of their children. So What's happening right now in our state is that parents and people who want to become parents, want to adopt or want to foster, they're facing discrimination solely based on their disability. They're seeing it in foster care and adoption, and we've actually have cases in our state where parental rights are being terminated as Child Protective Services comes in, says these parents have disabilities and take children away. Quality parents are out there with disabilities, and they're not given the same opportunities to adopt or foster. And that happens a lot because social service workers, they don't understand disability, they don't understand adaptive parenting, and seems to be a lot of pressure to act on families that are functioning. So the way that we're recommending to unlock that barrier is that Department of Social Services regulations could be revised to include some training. Social service workers can learn more about disability and about what it takes to be a parent and to do that well. The other thing that we want is that South Carolina must eliminate disability from the statutes as grounds for termination of parental rights. Ted, I think this leads back to one of the questions you've asked me a couple times. Isn't that against federal law? Yes. So this is another one of those cases. But South Carolina, we still have statutes that gives grounds for termination of parental rights solely based on disability. Hate saying it, but we want to change that. We have to eliminate it. Alex, we made it. Transportation is issue number 8. And we have a photo here of people using transportation. There's people at a crosswalk. One is using a cane to help with stability, and one is using a white cane to help with navigating. But they're all using transportation. So some background. Public transportation is offered in many cities in South Carolina, but not offered in most rural areas. Public transportation authorities are buying buses that are more accessible. There's accessibility guidelines for public transportation vehicles, and they're improving. But those vehicles aren't very helpful. The accessibility features of those vehicles aren't helpful when people with disabilities can't get to the bus stop because the roads are all broken up or beaten up, or there's no sidewalks or no curb cuts. Just as an example, I don't know how many of y'all are local to Columbia, but Comet, all of their buses have ramps or a lift on the fixed route service. And then there's paratransit that's afforded by the ADA for people who can't use the bus service because of a disability. So the barrier. Rural areas often have no access at all to public transportation. For areas that do have public transportation, city areas, the sidewalks and roads are poorly maintained. So if someone is using a wheelchair or a walker, sometimes the roads aren't passable. Or the sidewalks, if they exist, they have a tree growing in the middle of them, or there's a sign in the middle of it that obstructs the sidewalk. So there's a lot of things that need to change. The roads, sidewalks, they're poorly maintained, or they don't have curb cuts. Our systems a lot of times don't have accessible transportation symbols or easy to read road signs. And a lot of times this is kind of hit and miss. Again, this is a Columbia example. There's a very small section of downtown in the Vista that has some auditory crosswalks for people who are blind, and it's the only place in town. So how is someone who is blind going to be able to get there if everywhere else has only visual cues for pedestrian crosswalks? So just one example. And this is keeping people from using public transportation when it is available. So to unlock that barrier, South Carolina needs investment in infrastructure. That's kind of the first part. We have to put some money into our roads and sidewalks. And while we do that, we have to follow the accessible design. These are guidelines that are put forth and nationally recognized. We want to make sure that any new sidewalk is accessible and usable by every person. Additionally, investment in public transportation needs to take place, particularly in rural areas. Rural areas, one of the largest uh, barriers to employment is transportation. So in rural areas, people can't get transportation, can't get to and from a job, and can't get hired. Um, so it has to change. All right. Issue 9 is voting. This is a picture I took. We had the opportunity to work with protection and advocacy for people with disabilities in Columbia and Clemson University. They were researching accessible voting machines. So this is um, a friend of mine. I took a picture of him testing a voting machine, um, using it without eyesight to see how well he's able to navigate. So some background information. Voting, I'm sure y'all are fairly familiar. It's a basic right, and it gives individuals the opportunity to choose their leaders. It's also a civil and a civic responsibility. Okay, it's our duty to vote and to have a say in how things will go. Voting is also a community activity where the voter should be able to cast their vote in a private way. So this has really two pieces to it. Voting as a community activity, voting is a chance for you to go to your polling place, see your neighbors, shake hands, get your sticker, cast your vote, and while you cast your vote, you should be able to do that privately. We have a secret ballot system. It's a right. No one has to know our vote, which leads us directly into those barriers again. Okay, well, I'm having a hard time getting to the right slide. There we go. The barriers to voting is that a lot of times there are lack of accessible entrances, walkways, and restrooms. Um, and these things are physical barriers for people with physical disabilities to get there. I went to a polling place just to check out accessibility, and what I saw at this particular polling place was it said handicap voting around the corner, and it pointed to the side. It was unclear where that sign was pointing, and uh, that's not respectful language. We prefer to refer to people with disabilities person first. They're people, not handicapped. Um, and when I went around to the door that the sign was pointing to, it was way to the side of this particular polling place, and the door was locked. And I pounded on the door, and no one came um, at all. I pounded for a while, and then I went in the front, and the polling workers um, were defensive and couldn't really talk about how they would accommodate someone with disabilities. So we see it too with polling workers. They're not adequately trained on accommodating. People with specific disabilities are often asked to say their vote aloud um, so that it can be cast by a poll worker. This is where the security and the secret ballot comes in, is that sometimes people who are blind, sometimes people who have a physical disability that prevents them from using a touch screen, um, limited use of their hands. What is done in these polling places is they'll have a poll worker who receives the vote out loud from the voter, and then a second poll worker to confirm that that vote was correct. So where everyone else gets to come in and cast their vote and doesn't have to say who they voted for, people with disabilities are asked to share their vote with two other people who might be neighbors that really have no business knowing who they voted for. We want to unlock that barrier. We need regulations that specify disability training requirements for poll workers. We need standards and requirements. The poll workers need all the information in order to properly accommodate and facilitate voting. We also want the state to take steps to replace current voting machines with ones that are all-inclusive. This one's important because right now it's time. I went to a disability voting, no, it was a voting, it was a hearing of the voting commission, and what was said was that the voting machines that we currently have a 10-year shelf life. After 10 years, we really need to start replacing them. It's been 12 now, so these machines are 2 years past their prime, and there's really no plan in sight for how to replace those voting machines. There's also separate voting machines for people with specific disabilities so that they can vote. Um, our recommendation is that we replace the current voting machines because it's time, and we replace them with machines that are all inclusive. So any person can use one machine and their vote will be cast. That's ideal. That's inclusion, and that's what we want to see happen. So using the pitchfork, really we have 9 issues. Not to say that there are not more, but these are the 9 that we're focusing on right now. We know that these are common to people with a wide range of different disabilities. 2, we've set our goals. We're giving lawmakers a very specific way to address each of the issues. And our strategy is Advocacy Day. This is the beginning of our strategy. So the next slide is a fun one. It's just the Advocacy Day logo. I say ours. It's the logo of all the supporters, all 21 organizations, and all participants for that matter. So this is how Advocacy Day is meant to run and what the goal of it is. So from 9 to 9:30, we hope that everyone will come and check in. It says registration. Y'all have already registered online, but it's to check in and make sure you get your shirt, and there'll be time to make a sign for the rally, kind of like a protest sign, like a rally sign. There'll be a brief welcome at 9:30, and they'll kick off the speakers. We'll have a briefing for about 15 minutes. We just went through the 9 issue areas, and it took us a considerable amount of time. They're going to do it in 15 minutes, so more power to them. At 9:50, we'll have our featured speaker. This is Liz Persaud. She's from the Pass It On Center in Georgia. She has a lot of experience with advocacy and with speaking and with disability issues, so she's gonna really pick things up. At 10:10, we thought we were going to have Steve Benjamin. He had confirmed with us. We found out yesterday that it will actually be City of Columbia Councilman DeQuincy Newman, because Steve Benjamin will be traveling that day and regrets that he won't be able to join us. From 10:20 to 10:45, we'll have 2 state legislators speak. It'll be Representative Mike Pitts, who's a Republican who serves in the Lawrence-Greenwood area. He actually has a disability, so he'll have some personal experience to share. And we also will have Representative James Smith, and I'm not positive what his area is, but he's a strong supporter of us, and he's been very active promoting the event on Twitter. I don't know if y'all have seen him. At 10:45, Governor Nikki Haley will speak. I'm not sure if y'all have heard, but Governor Nikki Haley recently signed a governor's proclamation acknowledging the value and importance of people with disabilities to be included in culture and society, and also recognizing Advocacy Day. So if y'all have not seen that yet, check out Able South Carolina's Facebook page or Twitter handle, which is @able_SC. It can be found there. Nice, Ted. It's the language is really dead on with what the goal of the event is, and we're hoping that she'll actually read that at the event. 10:55, we'll have John Payne. He's from the Department of Education Office of Exceptional Children. He'll be speaking on some issues related to education. From 11 to 12:30, I hate that we didn't have enough room to list all of these. They'll be listed in the advocacy guide. We have a lot of speakers with personal experience with some of the barriers, personal experience with disability, and a message for all of us to hear. And I'm trying to do the math in my head. I believe we have 17 of those speakers, which it'll be fantastic. I mean, that's really we have some recognizable names from local politics, and that's great. But really, the bread and butter of the event and really the impact of the event is going to come from the voices of the disability community. After that, the rally itself will end at 12:30. The volunteers supporting the event will still be around, and we're really hoping that people who are registering are going to schedule times to meet with their lawmakers. And I'm going to help those of y'all that are here kind of run through that process of how to do that, how to meet with your lawmaker, how to communicate well. Some of these things are simple, and I can tell I've got a well-informed audience, which is fantastic. So take what's useful and leave the rest. First of all, this is a little bit of background about how South Carolina's lawmaking system works, is that we're all represented. People who are elected by us, they go into office, and based on what they perceive, based on what they believe about their constituents, they write laws that they think will benefit them. In South Carolina, our lawmakers, our senators and representatives, all of them are part-time. Okay, they work for the state part-time only. So with that, as you can expect, part-time is about 20 hours a week. Even though they're part-time, they still have to make countless decisions that impact every South Carolinian. And with that, they can't be an expert on every issue. They can't know the ins and outs of every issue. There's just too much going on for a part-time person. So they need expertise from others. They rely on expertise from people in the community that know the issues well. That's important to us, is that we probably have some expertise that we can offer them. We can probably give them a little bit of information that will help guide them towards the best decision for all South Carolinians and for people with disabilities. So we have these two houses, bicameral legislature, we call it. It's the House and the Senate. The House primarily focuses on money and budgeting, and then Senate focuses more on policy. I know that this is a simplification. In order for anything to get passed, it has to be passed by both. So they all do a little bit of both, but the House is supposed to be the more money-minded, and they're both money and policy, let's be real. All right, so this next slide, this is actually how we can find our representation. If you go to www.sclegislature.com, this is the official website of South Carolina's lawmaking body. That big red arrow points you straight to find your legislators. All you have to do is plug in your address, your street address, your city, and your zip. Once you do that, it'll pop up who your representative is, who your senator is, and from there you can click those links. You can find all of their contact information. You can find what committees they serve on. You can find some biographical information about them that's usually pretty limited. And the purpose of this, we really hope that you'll find your legislators at the very least and really take that the next step and schedule a meeting with them after the rally. And the purpose of that is that we can have a say in the legislative process. This picture is also a little bit of a simplification, but it makes it pretty clear of how the process works. A bill is a law before it becomes law. It's a law that isn't effective. It has not been passed yet. A bill can start in the House or the Senate or both. Similar bill would start in one and both. So the bill starts. It is read in the House, and then oftentimes it's put in committee. It's put in a committee that would be able to improve the bill, to answer some questions about the bill, and to make it a stronger bill. From there, it can come out of committee and go back to the House where it'll be read, using House as an example. If it's passed from there, it would need a companion bill from the Senate. It would need to be passed by the Senate as it is, or it would need Senate to pass the same thing. And once that happens, it's passed to the governor, and the governor signs it, and once the governor signs it, it becomes law. Okay? With this process, for those of y'all who know the process well, I know this is a little simple, but it shows how many different points we have in order to influence this process. We can influence it as the bill's being written. If we, a lot of times people write bills, everyday people, lobbyists write bills, lawmakers write bills, and we can influence the bill there. Or we can say, hey, lawmaker, we need a bill that says this, and push them towards writing it. We can tweak the bill we can influence the process in committee. We can encourage our lawmakers to improve the bill and to make it more realistic, more passable, more beneficial, and all those things. When it goes before the House, we have influence there. If we want to get it passed or if we want to kill it, then there's an option there. And we have influence with the governor. It's just one person, so we have a little less access. But we can say, hey, governor, veto this bill. Or, hey, governor, please sign this bill quickly. We need it. So that's a simplification of how the process works and the influence that we have throughout the course. A little bit more about, Ted, I see you typing. I'm going to stall a little bit. When are we going to get our own lobbyist? That I think we're going to hear that question a lot on the 8th. So who knows? I think that's something that people are asking right now. Right. That's how they come about, isn't it? So legislative influence. The way that we can influence is through our lawmakers. They're elected by us, so they work for us. That's not something for us to hang over their heads or be rude about, but it's something to know. They want to keep their jobs. They want to keep representing us, so they're going to do what we want them to do to a degree. We want them to make the best decisions, and in order for us to do that, we probably have to start building a relationship, and we have to communicate with them in a way that they can hear it. If we are rude and we slam things down their throats and call them names, then they're probably not going to do anything we say. So we want to be able to inform and keep open that communication. Lawmakers, the good thing about representation is that they're from our area. So lawmakers, if we call their offices in Columbia, we can schedule a meeting in Columbia. Or a lot of times we can call their staff person in Columbia and find out when they're going to be at the next community event in our neighborhood or in our county. And we can plan to see them, or we can make an appointment to see them. The other thing is that really lawmakers are just people. I think a lot of times we put them on a pedestal that to some degree they're to be respected, but it doesn't mean that they're out of reach. We want to respect everyone, and a lawmaker is just another person. So just like everybody else, they have email, they receive letters and phone calls, so we can contact that way. We can get in touch with them that way. Some lawmakers are even on social media, like Facebook and Twitter. My senator uses, well, he has a Twitter account. He doesn't use it very often. The governor has a Twitter account. I'm sure she has a Facebook account too. And that's another way that we can have pretty quick contact if needed. If your representative is James Smith, I guarantee you he has Twitter and knows how to use it because he's been talking about Advocacy Day a lot on Twitter. So it's another way to communicate. One recommendation that I would make is that if you meet with your lawmaker and they commit something to you, they say, I'm so glad you shared this with me. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. A good way to thank them is to do it publicly on Facebook or Twitter. It's polite, and it holds their feet to the fire in a way that doesn't push too hard. So if someone says they're going to do those things, you just say, hey, thank you so much for our time that we were able to meet. I'm excited to know that you agreed to do X, Y, and Z. Let me know how I can help. And then it's out there for everyone to see. So they're much more likely to follow through. Some legislative influence. Okay. The next two slides, these are 10 tips for effective communication. These are things I guarantee that you probably already know or know to some degree. And these are things that we want to practice with lawmakers. We want to practice with everyone, really. The first one is to be polite. If we have the best idea in the world, we have a really great suggestion, and we go in and we're rude and we're calling names or whatever, I can guarantee they're not going to hear that message. They're going to hear the rude, and they're going to forget the rest. So we want to be polite. The next one is that we want to find common ground. Maybe we don't agree with our lawmakers on some really important issues. Not saying that we should abandon those things, but there probably are some things that we can agree on. And when they know that we agree on two things, then they can kind of see where we're coming from when we say the third thing, which can be really important. We want to find common ground and commonality. The third thing is that we want to build a relationship. Lawmakers, we can have access to them if we invest time in that relationship, just like anything else. So if we build a relationship with our lawmakers, with our reps and senators, then when we know something is coming through, or we hear about some law that is about, or a bill that's about to get passed that we really hate, and we can just pick up the phone and call that person, and they'll say, "Hey, I was wondering what you were thinking about that issue." We probably have a whole lot of influence in that situation. Number 4 is to make our case. One thing that we want to do is that we want to make the points that we're there to make. Lawmakers are really, really good at being personable a lot of times, usually, and meeting people and being cordial because they had to do that in order to get where they are. But sometimes that gets in the way of the message. We want to make sure that they hear, yes, it's great to talk about how my mom is doing and find all the things we have in common, but I really want you to know that there's this barrier with education that we really have to do something about. So make sure that we balance that. Be firm and fair. The purpose of this event, and this is going to be direct, I'm going to be firm. The purpose of this event is not for you to get a picture with your lawmaker. That's not why you're there. That's not why you chose to participate. You're choosing to participate because you know that things can be better for people with disabilities. You know that rights can be furthered, that maybe your own rights haven't been honored or valued, and you're there to say something about that. So be firm. It's also probably not their fault directly. They probably did not make that choice and do that terrible thing. And that's where the fairness comes in. We want to make sure that they know what's happening and that they can make a change without being turned off from our message. Number 6, we want to be personal. If y'all make appointments with your lawmakers, you have personal experience that's going to be really valuable and is really going to take these 9 issues that may seem kind of monochrome, that might just seem black, white, and gray right now. But as you add your personal experience, it really puts things in full color so they can see what's going on. A lot of times, too, with issues, putting a face with an issue makes the issue completely different to a person. When they know how it affects an individual, it can change things. It can change minds. Number 7 is be prepared. You are getting prepared. If you did not want to be prepared, you wouldn't have signed up for this webinar, or you would have and you wouldn't have shown up. So I'm glad you're here. I can tell that y'all want to be prepared. Prepare a little bit more if you plan on meeting with your lawmaker, just to know what you want to say, what points you want to make. You don't have to have every word planned out and written down, but if you plan on saying, I want to talk about transportation and education, then make sure you hit those 2 points and that you're prepared on those 2 points. Kind of the inverse of that, the flip side, is number 8, and that's stick to what you know. We've talked about 9 things. Maybe you have some experience with a couple of those 9. Chances are more than one you've had experience with. Stick to the ones that are really the most important to you, the ones that hold your attention and your interest, and stick to the ones that you know. Because if we start talking about issues that we don't have any information about or we don't have any background on, a lot of times they see that and it discredits everything that we're talking about. So we want to be careful to stick to what we know. Number 9 is be open. Often lawmakers don't have all the information. And even though I don't like to admit it, I don't have all the information. And we can't have all the information either. So we want to make sure that we're open to what they have to say. Maybe they have a different perspective that we haven't thought of before that can help inform our own decisions. And the last one is last because this is a really important note to leave your lawmakers with, and that's being gracious. Time is valuable. Time is valuable for us, and it's valuable for them. We want to make sure that we thank them for that time while we're there, and again in writing after the meeting. It helps build that relationship on a really good note if we thank them for that time, because they didn't have to give it. I guess they technically could lock their doors and we would just stand there and pound on it. But they're allowing us to have a conversation, and that's something to be thankful for. So this next slide, and we're really rounding out the end of the webinar, is how to continue to prepare for Advocacy Day for Access and Independence. Y'all are already registered, or you would not have been told about the webinar, but get your friends and family to register if they're not registered yet. It's not required that someone register, but it helps make sure that we have the right accommodations. It helps gives us a better shot in making sure everyone will get the right t-shirt size. And really one of the important things about registration is we are going through all the addresses to see what districts are represented in both the House and the Senate, so that we can encourage y'all and support y'all with some numbers, saying if y'all have a meeting and you're meeting with your senator, you can say, "Hi, Senator so-and-so, I want to talk about some of these important issues with you, and I want you to know that we had 10 other people from our district that felt the same way." So that's an important thing. So please have your loved one register if they plan on coming. The next thing is to review, please schedule those appointments. It's a really good opportunity. Y'all plan on being at Advocacy Day already. You're going to be on the State House grounds, and all the offices are within that block. So you're going to be there. You might as well make the best of your time and meet with your lawmakers. Also, we're going to send out the advocacy guide to all the registrants in the next day or two. Please review that. It goes into some information about the issue areas, about what to expect with the day, 10 tips for communicating. A lot of these things will be in there. So flip through it, feel comfortable with it so you know where things are when you have any questions. And the last thing is, as we get closer and closer to the event, the excitement is growing. Here at the office, it's almost a buzz that this is happening so soon. You can kind of feel the energy. As you think about Advocacy Day, and as you think about how excited you are, because I know I'm excited to participate, I've been using these hashtags, and we encourage y'all to do the same leading up to the event and the day of the event, as a good historical record of what's going to take place, at hashtag SC Advocacy Day and hashtag Access and Independence. Hashtags are used in a lot of social media sites. Facebook has adopted hashtags. It's also used by Twitter and Instagram, and I think some other ones use it too. But it's a good way for all of us to kind of be putting information in the pot where we can all check it out and celebrate. This is the last slide, and really the thought that I want to leave us with. And it's a quote from Margaret Mead, and what it says is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." The world has changed over the years. I'm not quoting anymore. I'm elaborating. The world has changed a good bit over time. And it's a quote from Margaret Mead, and what it says is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." The world has changed over the years. I'm not quoting anymore. I'm elaborating. The world has changed a good bit over time. And anytime the world really changes, it changes because of a few people that are committed to change. And we have that. We have that even with just the four of us. And we'll have it in much greater numbers at Advocacy Day. So take heart that things can change and things will change. It takes commitment, and that commitment starts now. Uh, it's going to build through May 8th, and it's going to continue on beyond that. So as we prepare, just know that the world can change, and we can influence that. Now, I just want to give you all a few minutes to ask any questions, either about Advocacy Day itself, about some of the issue areas. Um, if you have specific questions that I can't quite answer, then I'll make sure that I can get you the best answer and make sure that I'm not giving you any misinformation. Uh, so, what questions do y'all have?
Legislators to inform me a little more, not only transportation for physical disabilities, but I have two emotionally and mentally able teenage boys, and the oldest teen will be taking the voc rehab training program this summer and starting in that. But I'm going to need to talk to them more about transportation for intellectual disabled people as well. And I have a good open line of communication with my legislators. I was actually there in March for Disability Awareness Day, and found that they are very open to our ideas and the chance to meet with them. And I'm certainly looking forward to May 8th to be there again. I hope that in the instructions that you guys send us and more paperwork, more instruction, we'll have some good parking suggestions and that kind of thing would be helpful.
Great. Yes. Transportation is an issue that we're really focusing on because it's a common barrier for people with different types of disabilities, and you touched on that with intellectual disabilities. There are resources. I'm not sure what area you're in. I know that if you're in the Columbia area, our local public transportation authority, they're offering travel training to help people with intellectual disabilities learn the specific routes that they would want to use. And that's a program that'll be running the next 3 years that they actually would go with a travel trainer and be able to learn those specific routes and go as many times as is necessary to really learn, okay, well, this is where I get on, this is the bus I take, this is the landmark I watch for, this is where I get off, all those things. For people who don't have those skills, that's something that would come under paratransit and is something to look into. Every transit authority should have some form of paratransit under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you'd have to ask your local transit authority. In Columbia, it's called DART, Dial-A-Ride Transit. Greenville, Spartanburg, Charleston, all the transit authorities should have ADA paratransit. So that would be kind of where you direct those questions. And your lawmakers, of course, have a say in that. Public transportation a lot of times is supported, at least in part, with tax money. So they would have the authority there. The resources I'm going to send to all the registrants, it'll include the advocacy guide, which will be helpful, and it will also include a 2-page document about parking. We have a lot of parking options. City of Columbia has been working with us really well, and they've actually given us free parking in the Park Street garage, so that whole garage will be free parking for people participating in the event with a parking pass, which I'll send out. And we'll have an accessible shuttle from that parking garage to the State House grounds. There'll actually be 2 vehicles we'll use. One is wheelchair accessible, and the other is a 15-passenger van. So both of those will be running to make sure people are getting to and from the parking garage and the State House grounds. Surrounding parking, there are also options. You'll get that in more detail in the packet, but it includes some parking on Assembly, on Sumter, and Senate, and you'll get that. Good question, though. Yeah, we're trying to make sure everything is covered. Hey, Alex, I see your question. Yes, you can have an electronic copy of this PowerPoint. Let me make sure that I get it transferred into accessible PDF, and I'll make sure that you have access to that. You too, Ted. I got you. Some registrants had a hard time. Thanks, Ted. Some registrants have had a hard time. I think some just missed the webinar. They had something else going on and weren't able to make it. Some had some technical issues. So what we'll do, I'll go to the registration that all of y'all did, and I'll send it to everyone from there. The webinar registration, everybody will get the PowerPoint with the notes that y'all weren't able to see this time. Do y'all have any other thoughts or questions?
I have just one quick silly question. I know that power comes in numbers, and we were talking about small groups can change the world. Do we know how many people will be in our group on May the 8th?
No. I wish I could give you a number specifically. Last I heard from registration, it was in the 90s, and that was a few days ago. I heard that we got 20 registrations like within a few hours today. Our expectation is that a lot of people are going to show up without registering because it's an advocacy event. Most people just kind of show up. We'll just have to see. We've done everything we can to cover parking. There's even the parking garage was a backup plan, but it's now turned into a parking plan. And then we have another backup plan that y'all will see in the parking. So who knows what the numbers will look like. It'll be significant. All the supporting agencies, the 21 of us, there's been a challenge put out that when there were 20 of us, we said that we want each one to bring 20 people, either staff or people that we work with, consumers, clients, all that stuff. So that math would take us to 400, and we'll just have to see how it goes. We're hoping the more the merrier, and this is the first year of this advocacy day, so it'll continue. It'll definitely be significant. I can say that much. With planning, and I'm just going to throw this out there, it looks like the weather is going to be warm, and there's no rain. We also have a rain plan. We have some accommodations for people whose disabilities impact their ability to take direct sun exposure or to maintain their appropriate body temperature. So we have some other accommodations. It's really just beyond exciting that this is happening and that we have so many different people with different experience all at the table and making it happen. I hope y'all are just, I'm bursting. I can hardly handle it.
I'm still considering bringing my 19-year-old son. I am kind of wishy-washy on that, and it's just going to depend on the state of mind he's in maybe next Wednesday, and I'll make the final decision. But I think it would be advantageous for my legislators to meet my son.
Absolutely. The more the merrier. We'll have a lot of different, I guess, kind of different types of participants. We'll have a lot of people with disabilities there to speak for themselves, and we'll have parents and families. We have a really diverse group, both in type of disability and disability and not. And I hope that you bring him. I look forward to meeting him. Do y'all have any other thoughts or questions before we wrap up? Okay. Well, I just want to thank y'all again.